I decided to take this journey back through the Bioshock Trilogy on a bit of a whim. These games, Bioshock in particular, were a fond memory in the back of my mind, like a distant lighthouse standing alone across a stormy sea. In terms of content for this channel, I knew I'd have plenty of things to say about each installment, but I was a bit surprised at all of the little details that I never caught my first playthrough of each of these games. At face value, each one of these titles is filled to the brim with political discourse, philosophical problems, and moral quandaries that put the infamous trolley problem to shame. Pulling a lever to change directions seems all the easier when compared to choosing to save or sacrifice a child within the bowels of a dystopia for the sake of personal survival. And while I could certainly sit here and pump out a script about the political commentary and ethics of Bioshock games ad nauseum, the topic that I want to cover today is one that I didn't identify until this most recent playthrough. It's a topic that I surprisingly haven't heard many people mention when discussing the games throughout the years. That said, I highly doubt I'm an original pioneer by noticing this particular connection. I often avoid watching other people's videos about the games I'm discussing in order to keep myself as far from bias or influence as possible. I say this in order to cover my bases, so to speak. Perhaps this topic has been covered by another creator in the wide world that is YouTube, but for me, this is all fresh and new. Before we venture further, I am obligated to give a spoiler warning for all 3 games. I'll be discussing major plot points and themes from all 3 of them. I covered both Bioshock and Bioshock 2 in separate videos, and if you've stumbled upon this one and are interested in the others, I'll link them in the description down below. I won't beat around the bush or hide the topic until towards the end of the video for some kind of poor attempt of increasing watch time or video retention. The connection between the Bioshock games isn't just the fact that they're tied together by some kind of multiversal ties, although that may be a good explanation for the relation. After finishing my video over Bioshock, I found out while doing a bit of research that Jack, the main protagonist from the first game, is technically the son of Andrew Ryan. I say technically here because he is born from his genes, but there is a bit of science and test tube baby stuff thrown in the plot, I imagine to explain the lack of a clear age gap. Upon this discovery, I then had the realization that all 3 games have a specific plot, with the main focus being around a parent and a child. At first, I didn't really know what to make of this, and after doing some in-depth research on the topic, I had a hard time coming up with anything. If you type in Bioshock and parent into Google, you'll be flooded with articles about parental warnings. I did find this particular article, but something tells me I'm not on the right track. I knew that I would ultimately have to continue and finish my journey through the trilogy and keep my eyes open to any clues or relevant information in order to come to some kind of satisfying conclusion. And I've done just that. After completing Infinite, I sat down specifically to review and brainstorm how all 3 games had these connections, and more importantly, what they meant. This trilogy has a lot to say about a lot of things, and by this point, it felt like they had covered the political and philosophical spectrum from end to end through a cynical, albeit terrifyingly sobering lens. And while these ideologies are displayed up front and are tainted by the imperfections of humanity, it seems that the familial bond between parent and child was up for critique as well. Certainly, you may have also seen these connections. They're not exactly hidden from the player. However, I initially made the mistake of viewing these games' message at face value, a topic I go into much greater detail in my Bioshock 2 video. That's not another plug, by the way, just an explanation why I won't be diving into it here. I didn't want to look at these displayed relationships with the simple mindset of, parenting bad, dads bad, moms bad. I can just picture little Ken Levine as a child being dejected by his father and saying to himself, "I'll show you one day. Who's a disappointment now, Dad?" Yet, despite my not wanting to take it at face value, it is hard to ignore that these parents are horrifically awful. After trying to murder you for hours, Andrew Ryan hands his son his personal golf club, perhaps as an extremely late birthday gift, but then says, "Now murder me with it." Dr. Sophia Lamb controls every aspect of her daughter's life, wanting to turn her into a messianic figure, pumping her full of Adam, which, because of Gilbert Alexander, she knows darn well that it will end in messy results. When she struggles to stop you, she exploits Subject Delta's weakness by suffocating her daughter to the point of her heart stopping in order to cause you to pass out just to get the upper hand. Then, there's Father Comstock. He locks his daughter away in a tower, observing her without her knowledge, siphoning her powers, and ultimately grooming her. The game's words, not mine by the way.
He was grooming me, wasn't he?
Comstock? Yeah, I think so.
To turn her into a leader that will rain down fire upon the world below Columbia. When she resists, he puts a leash on her and tortures her into obedience until she finally submits to his will. Like I said, I don't really want to look at the face value here, but holy crap. When I was a child, I thought my parents were evil when they didn't get me everything I wanted on my birthday. So, I sat down and I tried to make every clear connection I could between the three games. I started off simple, just starting with the relationships between child and parent. Bioshock. The protagonist is Jack, Andrew Ryan's test tube baby. You're created and brainwashed by Ryan's competitor, Fontaine, with the intention of infiltrating Rapture and assassinating Ryan. Kills father with golf club. Check. Bioshock 2. Eleanor Lamb is Dr. Sophia Lamb's daughter. Depending on how you play the game and what ending you get, Eleanor either saves Dr. Lamb or kills her by drowning her. Okay. Bioshock Infinite. Booker DeWitt, the protagonist, is Elizabeth's father. He sold his daughter, who he named Anna, as an infant in order to pay off gambling debts. However, he sold her to Father Comstock, who is actually just another version of himself from a different dimension. Booker DeWitt drowns Comstock, or himself technically. Then later, multiple versions of Elizabeth from different dimensions kill you by drowning you, Booker DeWitt. Or is that technically earlier since it's done so that Comstock will never come to be? Sure. That last one is a bit more confusing, but at least we have the basic foundation all laid out. All I had to do now was find the thing that connected all three scenarios. At least, a connection that is more profound than a compelling argument to always use contraceptives. Children? More like killing machines. My initial theory was that, in every instance, the child kills off their own parent, but that technically wasn't true. Sure, Jack kills Ryan, Elizabeth kills DeWitt, but Eleanor in half the endings spares her mother depending on the choices you make in the game. I understand that in the other endings, she kills her mother, but I wanted something more solid, seeing as regardless of your choices in the first game and Infinite, both fathers die. Okay, so strike one. My second theory was that perhaps this all had to do with carrying on the parents' legacies. In Bioshock 2, Dr. Lamb wants to turn her daughter into the first utopian, or daughter of the people, which is essentially a human with no selfish desires. Furthermore, Comstock wants Elizabeth to carry out his will, raining down fire on the Sodom, as he calls it, down below. However, Andrew Ryan doesn't seem to share that sentiment. In fact, he's willing to destroy Rapture so that no one else can have it, rather than welcoming you with open arms, intending you to carry on his torch. Andrew doesn't even know that you're his son until later in the game, suspecting you to be some kind of undercover agent sent by the CIA or KGB. He starts to piece it together, with his theory being confirmed upon seeing you, saying, "Now that I see you flesh to flesh and blood to blood, I know I cannot raise my hand against you." Him not even knowing of his son until this moment kind of throws out the idea of him expecting a generational legacy. Strike two. At this point, I started to feel like I was banging my head against a brick wall. My notes started looking like the corkboard that Ryan had set up in the room before meeting him. Perhaps I was just looking for a solid connection where there wasn't one and it was all just coincidence. That said, I found that hard to believe in a trilogy that revolves around freedom, or lack thereof, and more importantly, how they're all tied together. Ultimately, it felt like it was Bioshock 2 that was really causing a problem in comparison, because in that game, the parent doesn't die, at least not in half the endings. If Sophia Lamb died in every outcome, then I think I'd have a solid line of correlation here. I felt like I was missing a big puzzle piece, so I kept looking back on and thinking about Bioshock 2. That's when it hit me like a big daddy. Dr. Lamb wasn't the only parent in Bioshock 2. We play as Subject Delta, a big daddy whose adopted little sister is Eleanor Lamb. Towards the end of the game, Eleanor starts fighting alongside you as a big sister, and while doing so spouts out phrases like, "Stay away from my father," and "Learned this trick from dear Papa." For all intents and purposes, Eleanor Lamb is the adopted, albeit forcibly and accidentally adopted, daughter of Subject Delta. What happens to Subject Delta at the end of the game in every ending? He dies. Now we're cooking with gas. I finally felt like I had a solid connection between the games to go off of. Oddly enough, upon this discovery, I accidentally stumbled upon another as well. Not only are each of these parent-child relationships a bit strained, to say the least, but they were also all ones that came about in less conventional ways. Perhaps I could even go so far as to say that these children were unwanted. In Bioshock, Jack was the child of Andrew Ryan and Jasmine Jolene. Jasmine sold her embryo to Tenenbaum at Fontaine's order after her and Ryan, spliced. Jack basically turned out to be a test tube baby, raised and brainwashed without Ryan's knowledge. In Bioshock 2, Subject Delta was actually just a random deep-sea diver who stumbled upon Rapture. He was given the nickname Johnny Topside by one of Rapture's journalists. But ultimately, Ryan thought he was nothing more than a spy and threw him into jail. He was eventually turned into a big daddy against his will and paired with Eleanor as his little sister, a kind of pseudo-forced adoption process. In Bioshock Infinite, we have a bit more of a complicated explanation. On the one hand, I won't outright say that Booker DeWitt didn't want his daughter, but I will say that he did sell her to pay off gambling debt, and that also this nursery isn't really screaming Father of the Year to me. On the other hand, Comstock was incapable of having children. The experiments being run by the Lutesses left him not only full of cancer, but also sterile as well. So in order to have an heir to the throne, he does a little interdimensional hopping in order to find a daughter of his own. So we have three very specific, admittedly odd, parent-child relationships where in the end, the parent dies. I will point out now, before any naysayers hit the comment section, that in some of the endings for Bioshock 2, Eleanor technically absorbs your consciousness so that you can always be with her, but I still consider this Subject Delta's death. She only does it because you are literally dying. Furthermore, she makes comments along the lines that your instincts and memories will be with her, and that doesn't really sound to me like you're literally living within her. As for Ryan and Comstock, there's not really arguing whether or not they died in the game. I feel like they're pretty self-evident. So now that we have the connections finally laid out clear before us, what does it all mean? I think the overall message and theme for these connections has to do with sin, redemption, and strangely enough, hope. I find this message most prevalent in Bioshock Infinite, so we will start there. Elizabeth is locked away in a tower by Comstock for her entire life. He's secretly draining her of her powers and observing her without her knowledge. His ultimate plan is to train her to be his replacement and bring destruction on the world below, yet when we meet her, she is oddly light-hearted. Once you have escaped with her, she revels at the delight of the outside world, dancing alongside the people at a fair. However, this doesn't last for long. When conflict arises, Booker mows down anyone getting in their way, much to Elizabeth's disbelief and dismay. As the story goes on and as the stakes continue to rise, more and more of Elizabeth's innocence dwindles away. She is confronted with the consequences of her actions of opening tears carelessly, which leads to the messy and confusing death of Chinley and his wife. This back and forth eventually leads to DeWitt being trapped in the future, finding Elizabeth old and succumb to Comstock's will. It's obvious that her spirit is completely broken, while fire rains down on the Sodom below, just like her father always wanted. However, she sends you back to your time with a message. You escape once more and eventually overcome all the obstacles, destroying the tower that was siphoning her powers, and then the twist is laid out before us. Booker DeWitt is Comstock, and the only way to stop him is to kill DeWitt in the place where Comstock was born, a baptism. At first I thought this was a heartbreaking ending, but now my opinion on it has changed. As the camera pans back, we see the different interdimensional versions of Elizabeth disappearing one by one. Interestingly enough, Infinite only has one ending. In a series about freedom, choices, and multiple endings, there's only one way out here: Booker DeWitt's death. Every single one of these stories has a parent either abusing or mistreating their child. Fontaine literally grew you in order for you to be an assassin, and Ryan tries to murder you half the game, and upon finding out that you're his biological son, toys with you, then forces you to murder him. Dr. Lamb suffocates her own daughter to stop her enemies, with her final intentions being to modify her genetically past the point of recognition. DeWitt sold his daughter, while Comstock bought her for his own agenda. Yet depending on the choices you make in the first two games, you can dramatically change the outcome, and maybe, even more importantly, how you influence those who live beyond you. The good ending for the first game has the little sisters growing up, living seemingly normal lives, and being by your side on your deathbed. The good ending for Bioshock 2 has Eleanor showing her mother mercy and taking your consciousness into herself so that you can be her guiding mentor. While Infinite has no alternate endings, I genuinely see this as the good ending. To me, it doesn't seem like DeWitt tries to fight back. There's a bit of a struggle, but I think that's just more a natural reaction to being drowned. I used to think that Elizabeth's one-by-one disappearance meant that she was ceasing to exist, having drowned her own father, but in reality, she could have drowned him after she was born. So perhaps instead of her ceasing to exist, she's just ceasing to exist in these realities and will live on in one where she has a happy and fulfilling life. To me, the Bioshock Trilogy gives you two strong messages simultaneously. As a parent, it's important to think of the choices we make and how it will affect the later generations to come, showing mercy and kindness being just as important as exhibiting strength and power. We never truly know who's watching our every move. As a child, it doesn't matter if you were a test tube baby, adopted, or sold by your dad to pay for his gambling debts to your other interdimensional dad. Okay, admittedly, that would lead to years and years of therapy, but I see this as one's fate not being fully decided because of their upbringing and situation. At first, these 2 points sound a bit contradictory to each other. One point being a parent is responsible how they influence the child, the latter being a child doesn't have to be influenced by their parent. However, I would say that the first point still stands, and that the second point is better explained as your fate not being set in stone. Andrew Ryan built Rapture as a place built upon the ideals of only acting in your own self-interest. But Jack can choose to follow that by harvesting little sisters, or reject it by saving them. Dr. Sophia Lamb raised her daughter to put the ideals of selflessness first, but Eleanor selfishly wants to break free and be an individual, rejecting her mother's ideals, but, depending on your choices, follows in your footsteps and either kills her or shows her mercy. Elizabeth was raised to pass judgment and rain down fire upon the sinful world, only to look at her father as the one needing judgment, and by baptizing him, washed away all of his future sins. Okay, so I normally don't do this, but since I just finished these 3 games in 3 weeks, I thought it would be fun to rank them. 2 caveats before I begin. Firstly, I want to rate these games in 2 different categories. One for gameplay, the other for narrative. I think it's important to split these 2 up because I have very strong feelings about some of them. Secondly, I want to make this as clear as possible that this is just my personal, subjective opinion and is just for fun. I'm not making an argument over which is the best or worst, I just wanted to share my experience because I had such a great time revisiting these three. Okay, let's go. Starting with the narrative, in third place comes Bioshock 2. This may not shock anyone, but the issues I have with the story is that it often felt very empty. Dr. Lamb as a villain felt like she came a bit short. In fact, there's a ton of time dedicated to Andrew Ryan, and when your main antagonist has to share a spotlight with the past game's antagonist, that's not necessarily a good sign. I will say that it does get better towards the end, when Eleanor becomes a big sister and starts running around with you, and I love the part where you play as a little sister and see the world through their eyes, but this is like the last 15% of the game, with the first major chunk feeling a bit barren. In second place we have Bioshock Infinite. I really do love Columbia and the overall different feel of the world, but I have to admit, it just isn't Rapture. There is basically zero horror aspect to this one, and that was a big selling point for me on the trilogy as a whole. That said, Elizabeth is such an amazing character. When she was dancing on the pier and was just clueless about how ruthless the world was, it genuinely broke my heart. I really did want her and Booker to make it to Paris and let her have a happy ending, but that just makes the bittersweet ending all the better. I will say, the more I think about the multiverse stuff, the more holes I seem to be able to poke through it, which is a major problem for me. Okay, and first place for the narrative we have Bioshock. I think the reason this one is so captivating is it's a first introduction to an insane and detailed world. The twist at the end is mind-blowing and honestly caught me by surprise. In Infinite, there's a lot of weird stuff happening, so I felt a twist coming a mile away, but here it just seemed very straightforward. It's also a very clever play on the meta-narrative on following instructions in video games. I didn't question whether or not I was brainwashed because following orders is just what you do in games. Okay, for the gaming side of things, in third place we have Bioshock Infinite. I get that this is probably a hot take, and if I'm being honest, I was super surprised I felt this way. I actually assumed going into this that this one was going to be the most fun. They changed a lot from Rapture to Columbia. Only being able to hold 2 weapons at a time, there's no hacking whatsoever. You can still upgrade guns, but because you can only carry 2, it feels a bit lackluster. The plasmids are okay, I wish they would have gone a little more crazy with it. I just felt like it was reskins of the old ones. Bees? No, crows. Wow, innovation. I will say that I do love the skylines, but at the same time, I am not hitting anything while flying around on these things. Second place, Bioshock. This one's the classic. Introduction to the world, I love all the weapons in this game. One thing I particularly love about this and the second one is when you upgrade a weapon, it visibly changes the way it looks, and I think that's awesome. You can take pictures of splicers to research them in order to get passive buffs, which is a lot of fun. There's hacking, which at first is great, but I ultimately ended up absolutely hating this pipe minigame. I hacked everything that I came across, which means I did this stupid thing way too many times. Love the environmental situations you can use, like electrifying water or setting oil puddles ablaze. Just a solid experience. Finally, first place goes to Bioshock 2. This was another surprise to me, but ultimately it's just very similar to Bioshock's gameplay with a lot of improvements. You can wield plasmids and guns at the same time instead of having to switch between the two. The hacking is now just a timing minigame, and it just makes gameplay feel a lot more smooth and fluid. It didn't feel like I was just stopping the game to do some random minigame. In fact, the game keeps going as you do it, which adds to the tension a bit. Instead of just fighting big daddies and rescuing or harvesting little sisters, you actually adopt them and then have them harvest Adam while you defend them. Sometimes this would feel a bit tedious, but it was a step in the right direction in my opinion, especially with mini turrets and trap rivets. All in all, I had a fantastic time replaying these games and making these videos. If you made it this far, I really do appreciate you watching the video, and I genuinely hope you enjoyed it. It's been a delight making these and getting to talk about some of my favorite games from my life. I am entertaining the thought of covering some other games in this genre, so if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments down below. If you did enjoy yourself, consider subscribing. I hope you have a great day and stay magical.